Danny.
Thank you very much. Minister, I want to talk about central bank digital currencies, but before we get into that, can I just to frame it, we are seeing this great revolution in finance driven by technology. That's the story of our moment, this moment. Do you accept that fintech hasn't been disruptive to the finance industry itself, and particularly to the banks, in the way that it was predicted to do so? That actually the story of the last 10 years in fintech has just been of the steady automation of existing banking procedures, and actually what we've seen is the consolidation of the big banks who were present in the market 20 years ago, rather than this great explosion of new opportunities for consumers. Do you recognise that fintech has actually been a boon to the established banking sector more than to consumers?
No, I'm not sure I do. I think that if you look at open banking, for example, you've seen in many domains within the broad set of activities from, for example, an established retail bank, you've seen a very significant degree of predation. Same if you looked at market shares in small business lending. There's a lot of new actors that have emerged and taken material market shares. But it is the nature, I observe, of innovation that people will disrupt. You'll see founders, entrepreneurs start up new parts, explore business models, create proof of concepts. And it's not a bad thing if that then gets assimilated by existing players, if the consumer benefits and ideally the economy benefits. That's the nature of innovation. You see that in many domains. If you look at the automobile industry, you can see one or two very disruptive, pure zero emission, vehicle producers. The response is not for everybody else in the industry to sort of fall over and go home. It's then to adopt and assimilate those technologies. Okay. And you end up with an industry that doesn't look vastly different in terms of the names and participants, but perhaps the activities are different, and you've got one or two new large-scale players have emerged as part of that disruptive change.
Okay, all right. Talking about the Edinburgh reforms earlier, the essential deregulation of finance that the government is pursuing, you mentioned that it was driven by what you call jeopardy, the threat of not acting because of our competitors internationally are making these sorts of changes, or at least there's a threat particularly to the City of London and to our other financial centres like Edinburgh. The government is now pushing ahead very fast and hard on central bank digital currencies, and look forward to the announcements that are forthcoming on that. Can you just distinguish between the rationale for that as in terms of the jeopardy that other countries are doing the same? I mean, we know China's pushing very hard, even the United States, Europe as well. How much are we doing this because other countries are doing it and we don't want to lose financial business, versus we actually see the enormous opportunities in terms of efficiency or innovation from the technology itself?
Yeah. Well, in fairness, I didn't couch the Edinburgh reform solely in terms of jeopardy. There's a symmetry between the opportunities it will unlock and the jeopardy if we do nothing, the do nothing option. I think the same is true of sovereign digital currencies. I think, to be very clear, the consultation is going to say this is still an if, not a when. So we're not fully into the inevitability of doing this. Mm-hmm. And, as you may go on and highlight, there are some really important public policy issues about how you come forward with the design of a sovereign digital currency. And we've got to get them right. So in many ways, with the UK's strong financial reputation, I'd rather be right than be first. In any case, there are some others that are ahead, like China. There's been some pilots run elsewhere, and it will be a long lead time activity. So what I am not going to do as Minister is foreclose the opportunity by prevaricating and not coming forward now with the work that we would need to do to put you all in a position to be able to make that decision subsequently. So that's the purpose of the consultation. Okay.
I mean, there's a tension, and I recognise that there's a tension there between in what you're saying. You want to get it right rather than be first, but we don't want to prevaricate, and so the speed at which we proceed is a very material consideration. So it'd be good to understand where we are on that. But we need to make the distinction between wholesale and retail digital currencies. It seems absolutely crucial, and I recognise the enormous case that exists for wholesale digital currency. We need. You were talking about the speed of settlements earlier. There is a race to do digital wholesale transactions as fast as possible, and that is a key advantage that the UK could potentially own. So I'd be keen to understand, to what extent your ambition is for wholesale digital currency, and crucially, before I move on to retail, how you see wholesale digital currency being structured. And I'm conscious of a distinction between a centralised and a decentralised model there. Can you just unpack that a bit, and how do you see a wholesale digital currency working in a way that is both efficient but also safe from a privacy perspective?
Yeah. I'll try a different distinction, if I may, which is a wholesale digital currency provided by a third party, a private entity, not a state. Fiat-backed, so a stable coin that's properly backed by fiat. That we're a long way down the road with. That we are providing for currently in the financial services and markets bill itself. So that I feel we should be very open to making sure there are high quality.
That's not a sovereign.
It's not a sovereign. No, that's the distinction I'd make. But that would be the first use case, effectively, of what's likely to be a wholesale settlement coin. Okay, and we're fully behind that, although that wouldn't be driven by the government and its own balance sheet. Probably the first use case of a sovereign digital currency would also be wholesale settlement. That would be when we see, I think, 750 billion a day or something flowing through the central bank settlement systems. And so the automation of that by a sovereign digital coin is likely to be one of the first use cases of a sovereign digital currency when it comes. But because of some of the fraught public policy decisions with that, I'm sure that a wholesale fiat-backed stablecoin will get there first, and then we'll see if there are incremental settlement opportunities on top of that.
If I may, I think also a distinction that's useful to make is, unlike in the retail space, in the wholesale space, there is already access for banks to a digital form of central bank money. That doesn't exist currently in the retail space, and that will be the basis of the consultation. The Bank of England will be able to speak in more detail on this, but sort of some of the areas which sort of they are doing reforms is around the RTGS system, the real-time gross settlement system, and those reforms are looking at how the Bank of England can equip that the central settlement system for the UK to interact with new forms of distributed ledger technology. Yeah. You're right in making the distinction that the Bank of England haven't pursued a route by which the central bank's infrastructure is being decentralised, but they are looking at the improvements that can be made for how their infrastructure will be interoperable in the future. And as I say, they'll be able to speak in more detail on that.
Okay, just doing that work is probably a prerequisite anyway for later on having a more decentralised system.
Yes, but do you agree that if the government and the bank issues its own digital currency, that would quickly crowd out the private competitors that might, as you say, arise earlier? What would be the point of a private stablecoin if there was a wholesale sovereign currency?
I think it's too early to know that in truth, right. And what the different attributes of that would be.
Okay. Well, so my next question is then, do you share my concerns, or do you recognise the concerns that exist out there about the prospect of a retail digital currency backed by the government, whether centralised or decentralised, particularly a centralised one which effectively gives government oversight of people's private transactions? But even if it were a notionally decentralised, distributed system, do you recognise the very serious concerns that exist, particularly around privacy, from a retail digital currency?
Yeah, they're very, very. The government takes very seriously and will proceed on a design basis that fully accommodates those concerns about privacy. That's not the basis, So a direct retail coin that would provide all information about consumers on a transparent basis to the government is not the model that is envisaged. The model that's envisaged is a platform model, whereby the government would have anonymised knowledge of individual providers and providers themselves. Banks probably would provide wallets and consumers, and that's the limit to which information would sit, other than, as now, under the law to protect things like anti-money laundering or fraud. Yeah. So let me reassure you and others that the government takes that extremely seriously, and we would not be pursuing something that would amount to how people would characterise it as a surveillance state.
No, I recognise your concern not to avoid that, but you're not ruling out the natural progression from a wholesale currency to a retail one. You do envisage that people will, in due course, have a wallet on their phone that reflects an account that they effectively hold with
an intermediary rather than directly with the government.
Okay.
So that's a key design feature,
right,
to be very clear.
Okay, but it is the intention of the government to proceed towards a retail CBDC?
Well, that's the model that is being envisaged if the government proceeds. So if I can unpack that, what we're coming forward with is a consultation about what the attributes of a central bank, a sovereign digital currency, would look like. And there are many issues around that, what it means for money supply, what it means to protect privacy, the technical feasibility of that, and how you would come forward with that. So there's a consultation leaving open the question of whether it's a if or a when, to be clear. But that the proposed model, if we do collectively decide to proceed with that, will be a platform model that wouldn't allow the government to know an individual transaction data on an individual.
And this is the consultation that we will.
It's a consultation that I promised you within weeks, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, thank you.